Here's a cartoon that aired during Saturday morning breakfast that left an entire generation of kids sleeping with the lights on.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
And the most disturbing part? Their parents had no idea what was happening right in front of them. Between 1999 and 2002, Cartoon Network broadcast something that shouldn't have been possible, a children's show that operated like a David Lynch film wrapped in bright colors and silly voices. Courage the Cowardly Dog looked harmless on the surface. A pink dog, an elderly couple, their farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. But what played out in those 11-minute episodes was something far darker than anything else in children's television. The show's creator, John R. Dilworth, had one goal: to terrify children while making them laugh. And he succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. The premise was deceptively simple. Courage, an easily frightened pink dog, lived with Muriel and Eustace Bagg on a farm in literally nowhere, Kansas. Each episode brought a new supernatural threat to their doorstep: demons, aliens, ancient curses, body horror mutations. Courage, despite being terrified out of his mind, had to save his beloved Muriel from whatever nightmare creature emerged from the Kansas wasteland. But here's what made the show genuinely disturbing. It understood psychological horror in ways most adult content never achieves. Take the episode King Ramses' Curse. A 3D animated ancient Egyptian pharaoh appears, demanding the return of his stolen slab. The animation style shifts completely. This character doesn't belong in the cartoon world. His movements are jerky, unnatural. His voice is distorted and otherworldly.
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
What's your offer?
This night.
The episode's climax features him floating outside the farmhouse window at night, chanting, "Return the slab," while plagues descend on the house. The animation technique, called CGI cutout, created something that felt fundamentally wrong, like someone had spliced footage from a different, much darker show into a cartoon. Parents watching with their kids saw a silly episode about a mummy. Kids saw something that would haunt their dreams for decades. Online forums today are filled with adults discussing how that specific episode traumatized them. One viral Twitter thread from 2019 had over 200,000 likes, with people sharing stories of how "return the slab" became a phrase that could still make them uncomfortable as adults. The brilliance and horror of Courage was in its artistic choices. Creator John Dilworth came from experimental animation. Before Courage, he'd made surrealist short films that won awards at animation festivals. He brought that experimental edge to a children's show, and somehow Cartoon Network let him. The show employed techniques that were unprecedented in children's programming. Live-action segments would suddenly appear, real photographs of disturbing imagery spliced into cartoon frames. Animation styles shifted mid-episode, from traditional 2D to stop-motion to CGI to rotoscoping. These weren't budget-saving tricks. These were deliberate choices designed to create unease. Episode after episode broke the rules of what children's entertainment could be. Freaky Fred introduced a character whose entire existence was nightmare fuel. Fred was Muriel's nephew, a barber with an unsettling smile and a disturbing obsession with hair. The episode unfolds as Fred traps Courage in the bathroom and shaves him completely bald while narrating in rhyming verse about his compulsion. His internal monologue reveals he's been institutionalized for his behavior. The word naughty punctuates his thoughts like a verbal tick. His animation style for his face, close-up shots with those too wide eyes and that too wide smile, created visceral discomfort. What child needs to confront the concept of institutional mental health care and compulsive disorders during Saturday morning cartoons? Apparently, the creators of Courage believed they did. The show didn't just use monsters, it understood what made monsters truly frightening. The scariest episodes weren't about alien invasions or ghost attacks. They were about isolation, abandonment, and psychological torment. The Mask episode dealt with themes of domestic abuse. A mysterious dog named Kitty arrives wearing a mask, hostile and traumatized. Through flashbacks, the show reveals she's escaped from an abusive relationship with a gangster dog named Bunny. The episode features imagery of chains, cages, and genuine domestic violence metaphors. The abuser literally keeps Kitty's girlfriend locked away. This aired on Cartoon Network. For children, the writers weren't dumbing down complex topics. They were presenting them through a surrealist filter that made them more impactful, not less. But what really set Courage the Cowardly Dog apart was its understanding of existential dread. The show's setting itself was a horror concept. Nowhere, Kansas. Literally nowhere. A farmhouse surrounded by endless empty plains. The nearest town might as well be on another planet. When something terrible arrives, and something always arrives, there's no escape. No neighbors to call, no police station nearby, just 3 characters alone against incomprehensible forces. The show weaponized isolation in ways that reflected real childhood fears, that feeling of being powerless, of adults not believing you, of knowing something terrible is happening but being unable to make anyone understand. Eustace, the elderly husband, embodied this dynamic perfectly. He was cruel, dismissive, and often actively made situations worse through his greed or stubbornness. He called Courage "stupid dog" in nearly every episode. He refused to acknowledge supernatural threats even as they destroyed reality around him. He represented every adult who ever dismissed a child's legitimate fears as imagination. The show's visual style amplified its psychological impact. The color palette shifted dramatically between scenes, warm, safe oranges and yellows for moments of peace, then sudden plunges into sickly greens, deep purples, and stark reds when danger appeared. The farmhouse itself seemed to change shape depending on the emotional tone, walls stretching and warping like the show was occurring inside someone's nightmare. And maybe it was. Maybe that was the point. Series writer David Stephen Cohen later revealed in interviews that many episodes were deliberately designed to feel like fever dreams. The writers would often start with a feeling or anxiety rather than a plot. What does abandonment feel like? What does transformation horror look like? How do you visualize paranoia? Perfect remains one of the most psychologically damaging episodes ever broadcast to children. A computer-generated teacher named The Teacher appears, demanding Courage achieve perfection in increasingly absurd tasks. Every failure results in the crushing declaration, "You're not perfect." The episode climaxes with Courage having a literal nightmare where a grotesque CGI fetus appears, surrounded by darkness, telling him, "You're not perfect," before revealing, "But you know, nobody's perfect." The animation for this scene was deliberately unsettling, crude 3D modeling that fell into Uncanny Valley territory, existing in a black void with haunting music. The psychological impact was immediate. Kids watching felt Courage's anxiety, his desperate need for approval, the crushing weight of impossible standards. It was a masterclass in visualizing imposter syndrome and perfectionism trauma, concepts most adults struggle to articulate, delivered to 8-year-olds eating cereal. The show's sound design deserves recognition as its own form of horror. Most children's cartoons have consistent, upbeat soundtracks. Courage employed silence as a weapon. Long stretches of episodes featured no music, just ambient sound, wind, creaking doors, distant noises that could be anything. When music did appear, it was often atonal, discordant, designed to create unease rather than comfort. The show's various antagonists represented different types of horror. Cats, the recurring villain, was pure sociopathic menace, a red cat who ran various business fronts while plotting elaborate murders. He spoke in smooth, cultured tones while attempting to feed characters to monsters or trap them in deadly games. He was Hannibal Lecter as a cartoon cat.
The cruel veterinarian from Courage's origin story represented medical horror and authority figure trauma. In flashbacks, we learned Courage's parents were launched into space by this veterinarian, and Courage barely escaped. The vet appears in several episodes, always threatening to separate Courage from Muriel permanently. For kids who feared doctor visits or had separation anxiety, this character was a nightmare made flesh. But the show's genius, what made it more than just traumatizing content, was its heart. Despite everything, Courage always fought for Muriel. His love for her transcended his fear. The show taught that bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite being terrified. That even when you're small, vulnerable, and the world seems hostile, love gives you strength to face impossible odds. This emotional core is why the show resonated rather than just disturbed. Yes, it was terrifying. Yes, it gave kids nightmares, but it also validated their fears while showing that those fears could be overcome. The cultural impact has been extraordinary. The show ended in 2002, but its influence has only grown. Memes featuring "Return the Slab," "You're Not Perfect," and "Stupid Dog" circulate constantly on social media. Video essays analyzing the show's horror elements rack up millions of views. Adults who watched as children create fan art exploring the show's darker themes. Animation studios took notice too. Shows like Adventure Time, Over the Garden Wall, and Gravity Falls all contain DNA from Courage the Cowardly Dog. They learned that children's entertainment could embrace darkness, weirdness, and psychological complexity. That kids were smarter and more emotionally resilient than networks assumed. But none of these successors quite matched Courage for pure, unfiltered nightmare fuel disguised as a cartoon. Consider the House of Discontent episode, where a sentient house spirit tries to make Eustace happy by fulfilling his increasingly deranged wishes. The spirit appears as a ghostly construction worker who warps reality itself. Rooms change shape, the laws of physics break down. The episode's horror comes from watching reality itself become unreliable, a concept that shouldn't work in children's television, but absolutely does.
Or 1,000 Years of Courage, where Courage gets launched into the future and must prevent an asteroid collision, discovering that Muriel has been preserved as a consciousness inside a digital archive, desperate to be reunited with her dog after a millennium of separation. The episode grapples with mortality, digital consciousness, and the pain of loss across impossible timescales. Again, Saturday morning children's cartoon. The show's final episode, Remembrance of Courage Past, brought everything full circle. It forced Courage to confront his trauma, the loss of his parents, his terror of abandonment, his deep-seated fears that he's not good enough to protect those he loves. The episode featured genuine flashback sequences to Courage as a puppy, watching helplessly as his parents were taken from him. It was devastating, cathartic, and bizarrely mature for the show's format. What Courage the Cowardly Dog proved was that children's entertainment didn't need to be safe, sanitized, or simple. It could be weird, dark, psychologically complex, and emotionally honest. It could treat its young audience as capable of processing difficult emotions and strange imagery. The show trusted kids to be frightened and still come back for more. And they did. They watched, terrified and fascinated, understanding on some level that what they were experiencing was special, something that treated them as intelligent viewers capable of appreciating genuine artistry and complex themes. Today, child psychologists debate whether shows like Courage were harmful or beneficial. Some argue exposure to controlled fear through entertainment helps children process anxiety. Others worry about the lasting impact of such intense imagery. But what's undeniable is that an entire generation of adults can still quote episodes verbatim, still feels a chill at certain images, and still remembers exactly where they were when they first saw King Ramses floating outside that window. The show exists in a unique space, too scary for some kids, not scary enough to be banned, weird enough to be memorable, and crafted with enough skill to be legitimately impressive as art. It was psychological horror that aired between commercials for action figures and breakfast cereal. It was David Lynch meets Looney Tunes. It was proof that children's entertainment could be genuinely avant-garde. And somewhere in nowhere, Kansas, a pink dog is still fighting monsters, still terrified, still brave despite that terror, still protecting the ones he loves from the incomprehensible darkness that surrounds their little farmhouse on the edge of nowhere. Because that's what courage really means.